So why don't we get started? Kayla, could you call the roll, please?
Trustee Cates,
Here.
trustee Riley,
Here.
trustee McMahon,
Here.
trustee Mishu,
Here.
trustee Flood,
Here.
trustee Kane,
I think she's going to be a bit late.
and trustee Eames.
I don't know if she's gonna make it.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So welcome to the meeting of the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee for August. And the first thing we are going to do is to go into an executive session to discuss a number of matters. For those of you who are not participating in the executive session, we're scheduled to come out at about 9:40. So hopefully we'll keep very, very close to that schedule at 9:40. So could I please have a motion for the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee of the Board of Trustees to go into executive session under the provisions of 1 MRSA Section 405(6)C to discuss the condition, acquisition, or disposition of real property or economic development if premature disclosure of the information would prejudice the competitive or bargaining position of the University Main System. Is there such a motion?
So move.
Moved by trustee Mishu and seconded by
Second.
trustee Flood. Thanks very much. Kayla, could you call the roll for that?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Mishu,
Yes.
trustee Riley,
Yes.
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
and trustee Flood.
Yes.
The motion carries.
So you will transfer us into there, Kayla?
I will, hold on.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, welcome back, everybody. Back in our public session. Thank you all for your patience. Sorry, we're a couple minutes late here getting back. And we'll now move on to the public portion of our committee agenda. Just to remind everybody, please, to leave your mics muted when you're not speaking, particularly if you have dogs in the background. So the first item on the agenda is tab 1 is a reimbursement resolution, University of Maine Factory of the Future. And President Farini Mundy will present this. Good morning again.
Good morning again. Thank you. I'm actually going to turn this over, I believe, to Carolyn McDonough. Carolyn? Yes. To explain what this is, it's to do with it's to do with allowing project expenditures for the GEM Factory of the Future that were made prior to bond issuance to be reimbursed with bond proceeds. And so I would turn either to Carolyn or maybe it's Tracy who came off mute. Sorry. Okay. Thank you, Tracy. Sorry.
Thank you. By the way, just for those who have the materials, this is tab 1 of our materials, which I think begins on page 16 of the documents. Carolyn, please go ahead. Good morning.
Well, good morning. This is Tracy Elliott.
Tracy, excuse me.
No problem. And President Farini Mundy is correct. So this is a reimbursement resolution for project expenditures, and it relates to UMaine's Factory of the Future, the GEM project. The action item enables the university under U.S. Treasury regulations to reimburse itself with future financing for construction-related expenditures, including those made 60 days prior to the board's approval of this resolution. And this allows the university to use debt proceeds to reimburse itself, but it does not in any way obligate us to issue financing. It simply preserves maximum flexibility for financing as advised by our bond counsel. The resolution is for the full 15.3 million, which the board has already approved back in September of 2022 for design for facilities and equipment and ancillary pre-construction costs. And for that brief introduction, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Tracy. Questions about this proposal? And by the way, I can't see everybody on one screen, so if you have your hand up and I'm not calling on you, please speak up. But I'm not seeing anybody. So if there's no discussion, I'll read the text of the proposed resolution. That the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded for Board of Trustee approval at the September 11, 2023 board meeting. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and approves the reimbursement of project expenditures prior to bond issuance. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Kane and seconded by,
Just looking for the mute button and none but moving it.
and seconded by,
I'll second that.
seconded by Trustee Flood. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Kayla, if you could call the roll.
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Michoud,
Yes.
trustee Riley,
Yes.
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Kane,
Yes.
and trustee Flood.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. So we'll now move on to tab 3. The agenda item at tab 2 has been withdrawn for this meeting. So moving on to tab 3. This is the University of Maine Advanced Structures and Composite Center, the ASCC, Secure Smart Textiles Laboratory Authorization Increase. President Farini Mundy. And again,
Yes, thank you.
tab
So,
3.
before you is a resolution requesting authorization to expend an additional about 1.9 million to complete a renovation of a portion of the existing Advanced Structures and Composites Center. This is a secure smart textiles laboratory that we have under construction. It's a 3-phase project. Phase 1 has been completed. This is to expand our capacity to complete phase 2. And specifically, it includes the need to ensure that we have adequate provisionally compliant provisionally compliant limited occupancy mode because of the security of the facility and our need to meet contract obligations, and at the same time to be sure that we continue to work on ADA compliance before we move all the way out to full occupancy. So I can turn to Kelly Sparks to give more detail on this, but essentially what we're requesting is the additional expense to keep this phase of the project moving. We have the funds in hand, and then phase 3, we will come back to you at the time that we're ready to move into that phase when we have additional funding. I don't know if Kelly has anything to add to this.
Yeah, I might add just 2 small points. Thanks, President Freeney-Mundy. The first is that this is fully externally funded through a contract with the U.S. Army of Medic Soldiers System Center. This work allows us to finish all current contracts that we have in place with the ASCC, and sets us up for phase 3. So it includes a vestibule and stairwell, which will provide the provisional access, as the president noted, and we'll also put in the elevator core so that in a phase 3, if the space is used for continued contract work, we can add that elevator in a phase 3.
Thank you, Kelly. Questions from the committee? Yes, Barbara. Trustee Alexander.
I didn't mean to speak prior to any committee member who wanted to speak, so I'll defer to other committee members first, or it's up to you.
No, thank you. I don't see any, so please go ahead.
Okay. No, I was just going to say I have no knowledge of or ability to comment on the substance of this proposal, but I did think that from now on we were going to see on cover sheets and part of the presentation the linkage to strategic plan, financial matters, discussion of budget implications, and label it in a way that allows us to make sure that all of the strategic plan policies have been considered in light of this proposal in front of us. I think that the unified accreditation issue here is no doubt NA, but nonetheless, I was just wanting to bring this generically to the committee's attention and see if there's any thought given to that particular issue. It's going to come up in your forthcoming work plan too, from me anyway.
Right.
A question. Thank you.
This is Gretchen Callan. I can speak to that in general. The updated revised AIS sheet templates didn't get rolled out prior to the facilitation of this committee. So the next FFT committee, you will be seeing the updated AIS sheet templates that include information specific to the strategic plan, unified accreditation, listing out the actual presenter, and so forth.
Thank you. And Barbara, thank you for being our conscience and bringing us back to looking at those issues every time we're making a significant step. Thank you. Maybe for people who are watching who may not have seen our previous discussions about this, could one of you again just give us a quick understanding of what the Secure Smart Textiles Laboratory does? We've talked about this before, but it's an interesting project and some people watching might not know.
Kelly, do you want to start or shall I go?
Either way, I'm happy to give an overlay here.
I can add.
Okay, so it is 3D printing and a green and bio-friendly textiles printing. So they are, it's kind of, there's 2 pieces to it that they're using in Department of Defense and other related defense. I'm not coming up with the words today. I apologize. Other related textiles in use in that industry.
So what's particularly exciting, because it's a composites lab, so it's all about the materials And this is a facility that will allow both development of, experimenting with, testing of various kinds of textile type materials for a lot of applications, including the ones that we're funded to do now. So it's really true to the whole ASCC concept of being about composites materials. This kind of work typically would involve people from chemical engineering, from mechanical engineering, from chemistry, from a range of fields who are working together to design these materials.
Thank you very much. It's really helpful. Any other questions or comments about this before we propose a vote? Okay, well, let me read you the text of the proposed resolution that the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded for consideration at the September 10/11/2023 board meeting, that the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and authorizes the University of Maine system acting through the University of Maine to expend an additional $1,880,738 for a total of $4,332,006 to renovate a portion of the existing ASCC facility to accommodate installation of a secure, smart textiles laboratory to be utilized for research on smart materials. Is there such a motion?
So
So
moved.
moved.
By Chair Riley and seconded by, I'm sorry, I didn't catch it,
I'll second that. Thank you.
Trustee Flood. Thank you. Any further discussion about this issue or on this motion? Seeing none, Kayla, could you call the roll, please?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Mishu,
Yes.
trustee Riley,
Yes.
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Kane,
Yes.
and trustee Flood.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to tab 4, which on our sheets begins page 31, and this is the dental clinic expansion at UMA. And a special welcome again to President Cushman, who has now been on the job for coming on 2 months, I guess, so knows everything about the history and present and future of UMA campus, and will be glad to answer any questions on any subject, I'm sure. So, President, welcome, good morning, and hope things are going well so far for you.
Thank you. They're going great. I am still working on understanding the entire history, but I'll get back to you on that. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present on this. I'd just like to highlight a few things about this proposal. First of all, it builds on one of our UMA strengths, meeting a workforce need. There is a shortage of dental professionals, especially in rural areas, and this will help to meet that. It is a system collaboration with the University of Southern Maine in the Lewiston Center. And best of all, it's grant funded. The Northeast Delta Dental Board has given us $665,000 for this. Buster, do you have further details?
Thank you, President Cushman, and good morning again, Chair Cates. As President Cushman mentioned, yes, there definitely is a shortage in professionally and formally trained oral health professionals. While all of us are impacted by that, President Cushman mentioned the rural areas also impacted are those that are poor, minorities, children, the elderly. So we feel that this is a real opportunity for us to at least make a dent in that and to help the state. By doing this expansion there in Lewiston, we can go from 6 to 12 dental assisting students. And in the expanded function dental assisting, we can go from 12 to 18. So if you look at the entire program, combining Lewiston and Bangor, each year, UMA will be providing 24 dental assistants to the state and 30 expanded function dental assistants to the state. The total cost of this initiative is $665,000. Approximately $200,000 of that will go toward construction and renovation. The remainder will go for equipment, furnishings, instruction, and student support. And as President Cushman mentioned, we're fortunate to have gotten a grant from the Northeast Delta Dental Foundation, who's very much supportive of this expansion. The full $665,000 cost will be covered by this. And I might mention the funds are in the bank, so we already have the money. In terms of operating expense, UMA will incur a very slight additional cost, something under $4,800 annually. And that's to cover the additional square footage that we're leasing from USM. So with that, Chair Cates, we do ask for your approval to move forward. And we're happy to respond to any questions that you or the committee members might have.
Thank you, Buster. Thanks very much. Questions from the committee? And again, I'm sure we'll see the next time the link to the applicability to the unified accreditation and the strategic plan. Trustee Flood, please.
Thanks. I just wondered if this was something that you already have or will be using Tori to make some kind of positive announcement about that. Sounds like a very positive, needed thing, and our strategic plan talks about us working with the state's needs for various manufacturing and health needs, and this is really a great one. Has she been part of this at this point, or would you planning to have her be part of this? That's my question.
We would love to have more hype around this, because I think it really does do what is needed in the state and meeting the immediate needs of the workforce, and the collaboration is a nice element too, and the fact that we got a grant for it. So yeah, UMA would be very happy to have more PR around this.
So hopefully someone on this call will make that connection. Excellent. Thanks, Pat. Trustee Alexander.
Well, I was just would love to hear more about the connection to offering integrating this program for other campuses, students in other campuses. There was a brief mention of that in your oral presentation, but it's not in here under the unified accreditation description. And it would be great to have that more detail included here. Can you explain that a little more? It sounded really good.
Buster, are you able to address that?
Well, I know that we have had some conversation about working with the University of Maine at Presque Isle potentially, and expanding into that area. That's still being worked on. So I can at least tell you that much at this point anyway. Clearly, looking at other possibilities, we've already been in discussions, for example, with USM about housing, since we have nothing there in the Lewiston area, but graciously USM has opened and is willing to work with us on housing students there, probably in the Gorham area primarily. So I'm sure you're looking for more, but we certainly can get back to you with additional details.
Thank you. Is there other questions? I am not seeing or hearing any. So let me read you the text of the proposed resolution. That the Finance, Facilities and Technology Committee approves the expenditure of $665,000 for the expansion of the University of Maine at Augusta Dental Clinic located on the Lewiston Auburn campus in Lewiston, Maine. Is there such a motion?
So move, David.
Moved by
Second.
Trustee McMahon and seconded by Trustee Kane. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Kayla, could you call the roll, please?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Mishu,
Yes.
trustee Riley,
Yes.
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Kane,
Yes.
and trustee Flood.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. So we'll move on now to tab 4 on our agenda. Excuse me, to tab 4, which is renewal of the Allagash Wilderness Camp land lease. And President Hadeen from Fort Kent is going to tell us about that.
Mr. Chair, could I just mention for the audience at home, I think we put a typo on your sheet. It's actually tab 5.
Oh, yeah, that's right. There are not two tab 4s. This is tab 5.
Sorry about that.
And that's okay. And for those following along at home, that's tab 5, and that begins on page 34 of our materials. Thank you. President Hadeen, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to share this information. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Chief Business Officer Pam Ashby to explain more information about the land lease. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, President Hadeen. My story is going to be short, but it's going to start back in 1998. An agreement was entered into between UMFK and the Maine Department of Conservation Bureau of Parks and Lands for a no-cost lease of a 2.3 acre parcel of land in T13 R12 Wells Round Pond unit of the Maine Public Reserve lands. In the year 2000, UMFK built a camp on this remote site, which is within proximity of the Allagash River waterway for instructional and other educational purposes. In 2019, the restricted use clause was amended and now allows usage of the camp by other University of Maine system campuses for the purpose of natural resource-based education or research. The request before you today is simply to renew the no-cost lease of the land for an additional term of 10 years. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Questions of Pam or the president about this issue? Any further comments? Seeing none, let me read the proposed resolution. That the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded to the Board of Trustee for Board of Trustee approval at the September 10, 2023 board meeting. That the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and authorizes the renewal of a 10-year no-cost lease of a 2.3 acre parcel of land in T13 R12 WELS Round Pond unit of Maine Public Reserve lands as the continuing site for the Allagash Wilderness Camp. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Mishu and seconded by Trustee Kane. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Kayla, could you call the roll?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
trustee Mishu,
Yes.
trustee Riley,
Yes.
trustee McMahon,
Yes.
trustee Kane,
Yes.
and trustee Flood.
Yes.
The motion carries.
Thank you. We're actually running a little ahead of schedule, so let's move on to the next agenda item, and then perhaps we can reward ourselves with a 5-minute break we don't usually take. So let's move on to tab 11, which is, the number is somewhat out of order, but it's tab 11, which begins in our materials at page 110. And this is a discussion of the Deering Farmhouse renovation revenue allocation, University of Southern Maine, an issue we've discussed before. President Edmondson, good morning.
Good morning, Trustee Cates. Good morning, everyone. As we begin, I would like to take a moment to introduce Justin Swift, who is with us today. On September 1st, Justin will begin his role as the Chief Business Officer and Vice President for Finance and Administration at the University of Southern Maine. I'm really pleased that he'll be joining our leadership team, and he's doing so after we conducted a pretty thorough national search. So welcome, Justin.
Thank you.
Welcome to the committee. Good morning.
Thanks. The Deering Farmhouse project, as many of you know, is it's a historic home on the University of Southern Maine's campus in Portland. We had an authorization to spend $65,000 in FY23 to do a study of the property, and then we had authorization to spend up to $500,000 in FY23 to move the structure from its current foundation to a spot that is just a couple of 100 yards away. The foundation had been in bad shape and the structure needed to be moved in order both to shore up the structure and then also to make room for the Center for the Arts. We had authorization to spend up to $2 million on the project, but only up to $500,000 by the end of FY23. What we have learned is that the project will probably cost more than $2 million to finalize the renovations of the structure, and it is difficult to find grants and philanthropy for this particular building. And so what we're asking for is a short-term investment for a long-term savings. And by that I mean we're asking for authorization to spend up to $750,000 out of our FY24 budget. That is in our budget. We are just going to move the structure, weatherize it, and not renovate it. And so we will not be spending $2 million on the total renovation to renovate this. We'll wait until a later date when we either have a different situation with our E&G funding, or when we can indeed be sure that we have philanthropy and grants secured. The house is a historic structure. It is not on the historic registry, but it does seem to be important to the people of Portland and to our neighbors. And in the past, one of the issues we faced when the Deering barn was torn down in the 70s, there were a number of student protests and a lot of negative attention to the university at that time. And so we are hoping to not have that kind of negative attention, and instead quietly move the farmhouse, button it up, and keep on track with the Center for the Arts project. So Justin, I don't know if there's anything else that I missed that you may want to add, or Ryan.
Yes, and looking at the potential additional funding, outside funding, though, the house is not on the historic registry, so we do not qualify for historic tax credits towards that renovation. As the president did mention too, the timing of this also will ensure that the Center for the Arts project remains on schedule.
Thank you, Justin. Ryan, was there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, just would like to just offer my support for the move. We've worked closely with the campus. It does increase the authorization, but even with this, we'd be limiting our exposure to about 1.3 million. We originally were in for 2, so we think this makes a lot of sense and fully support the campus's direction.
Thank you. Trustee Flood.
Thank you. I raised a lot of questions on this last time we talked in depth about it, and I appreciate what you've described. It sounds, I think, Ryan, you just mentioned 1.3, so we're going to be authorizing 1.3 of the 2 million that we had planned, and so we have that other 690,000 that we may or may not get philanthropy for. We may or may, we have some questions about that, but at least we've got the building moved. We've got it buttoned up so that it's off and out of the way, and it still gives us the potential to raise funds once that building's moved to keep it to beautify it in some way for the neighborhood. Is that right?
I think that's all right. I go by Trustee Kane's motto of trying not to do math on Mike, but I think all that math works. I think it's the right decision.
I appreciate it, and thanks very much.
Other questions? Just on the cost savings portion of this, I think I'm right in saying that originally there was some talk about not only moving the farmhouse, but an addition to the farmhouse, which did not have much historical value. That addition is not being moved. It's just the historic farmhouse itself. And if we were not to authorize this, it actually might hold up the construction of the Center for the Arts. So this is an important vote.
Yes, both of those points are correct, Trustee Cates. Thank you.
Thank
We
you.
are not putting an addition on to the building.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, let me read the proposed resolution that the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee approves the following resolution to be forwarded for Board of Trustee approval at the September 10/11/2023 board meeting, that the Board of Trustees accepts the recommendation of the Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee and authorize the University of Maine system acting through the University of Southern Maine to add $750,000 in university E&G resources to the Deering Farmhouse renovation project. Is there such a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Trustee Flood and seconded by
Second.
Trustee Kane. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, Kayla, could you call the roll, please?
Trustee Cates,
Yes.
Trustee Mishu,
Yes.
Trustee Riley,
Yes.
Trustee McMahon,
Yes.
Trustee Kane,
Yes.
and Trustee Flood.
Yes.
All right, the motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Perhaps because we are running ahead, why don't we take a break until 10:25, which will still keep us ahead on our agenda and allow people to stretch their legs and whatever. So we will reconvene at 10:25. Thanks. Hey, welcome back, everybody. I see most faces back already, and we can resume the agenda. So why don't we move then on to tab 6, which is our regularly scheduled review of IT projects with a value of $250,000 or greater. And good morning, David Demers.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Cates. And I promise to keep you on track to make sure we wrap up on time. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, but please do feel free to interrupt me if you do have any questions as we go through. A couple of notable changes.
David, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just on that point, again, you're taking the screen. So if people do have questions, just please speak up because we can't see you. Thanks, David.
Yep. All right, so I did include a project that is wrapping up. About a year ago, you approved an expenditure of $2.6 million to replace our aged Canon multifunction device fleet. I am pleased to report that we are just about done deploying all of the devices as we migrate over to a managed print services provider through Xerox. This is the information I shared as to why we were making this change, notably that our Canon fleet was beyond its serviceable lifetime. The average age of those devices was 7.6 years when their actual life expectancy was closer to 5 or 6. And we were aiming to provide an environment that provided a more consistent user experience across the board. So more consistency in the devices that were out in, on each of the campuses, making sure that individuals had the ability to securely print to these devices, drive up our environmental sustainability and drive down our overall cost. So I do have some metrics to show you what we've done on all of those metrics. But a couple of things to note is that our original goal was to have all of the devices, the major deployment of devices completed over the summer period. We have reached that milestone, and all of the devices are operational as installed. Just reminding folks that one of the goals for this was to optimize our print fleet deployment. And at the end of the day, we have installed a total of 640 devices across all campuses. That is a reduction from 1,200 plus Canon devices that we had previously. So that in and of itself does save on costs. Since the project began, we have tallied over 1,600,000 prints on these devices and over 4,200 active users. Now, keep in mind, we were deploying these right at the end of the spring semester. So we fully expect that as the fall return occurs, these numbers will spike significantly, but it did give us a chance to put all of the plumbing in place to make sure the devices are operating as intended. A couple of things just over the summer period. We are using something called Find Me Printing. What that is when you print something from your device, your laptop or your computer, it goes into a print queue. It doesn't spit out directly at the printer. An individual can then walk up to any printer, doesn't matter. You can actually walk up to a printer on a different campus. You swipe your ID card and it will show you all of the prints that you have pending. And then you can say, yes, please go ahead and generate these and leave these other ones alone. That in and of itself will actually help to reduce waste, overall costs, environmental impact, and also the security risk for printing sensitive documents without having the opportunity to go to retrieve them in a timely fashion. Since we went live with this environment, we have seen a total of 138,000 print jobs or pages where folks decided they actually did not need to put that ink on the paper. That results in an overall environmental impact of saving just under 12 trees, and real dollars start to add up where we're just under about $9,000 for not printing those jobs. So this is going to have a huge impact on our overall efficiency with this environment. Just noting a couple of risks when we went into this project that we still are aware of. We are still working with departments to make sure that individuals are able to charge to the departments that they should be charging them to. This has had an impact, particularly for our research community, and we are still working out some of the details of making sure that folks that are on soft funded positions still have the ability to print to the departments that they need to. The other thing is as I said previously, these were rolled out right at the end of the spring semester. So we will expect that we will have to have additional training for faculty and students when they return in the fall. But we have all of the documentation, the help desk is prepared. And we haven't seen a huge influx of support calls since we went live with the system. So that just speaks to its ease of use. We are still finalizing the billing automation. We expect that that will be done by the end of this month, maybe spilling over into September a little bit. But what we are having to do is for those individuals that don't have a department that they can charge to, we are needing to on the back end transfer those expenses over on a monthly basis. So we're trying to minimize the burden on department accounts as we speak. Still a few minor bits and pieces to work out, but overall, we're very pleased with this and thank you for your support of making this investment. It will have a huge impact on everyone going forward. So switching gears over to repaving Main Street. This is the slide that I typically use to introduce the project. I'm not going to do it again here. You've seen this slide before, but just to point out that we are working steadily on the cloud implementation project, as well as the discovery process related to the campus solutions reimplementation. So I'm going to talk about those two in separate entities for the next couple minutes here. Last time we met, I did let everyone know that we were needing to make an adjustment to our timeline for the track one, which was the full HR environment. And we decided, and it was recommended from our implementation partner at that time, that we would be better served by putting the HCM and the ERP projects, track one and track two, on similar timelines. There were some reasons which I'll summarize in just a second, but the key one here is that we were a little bit delayed in getting data converted out of the HR environment, as well as landing on decisions that allowed us to move forward on the HR implementation. But I think we're now at the point where we're picking up steam. So we have revised that HR implementation timeline so that we will be going live with that platform in July of 2024. It's still a tight timeline. A lot of dominoes need to fall in the right order to hit that benchmark, but we are much more comfortable with that timeline than the original one, which had us going live in December of this year. We are rescheduling the second build of our application system so that the end users can go in and test the environment with our new data structure, our new chart of account segments defined, and that will occur in October of this year. And we are still picking up speed on being able to efficiently convert data from our existing PeopleSoft environment and bringing it over into the HR environment. I am pleased to report that for track two, the ERP system, which is our financials, our general ledger, accounts receivable, that system is currently under review. So we have our first application build of that environment. We kicked off the purchasing and accounts payable review last week, and those are going very well as we speak. So a couple of things that I noted last time we discussed or brought this project up were some key critical business decisions that were causing us some angst in terms of being able to move forward. So I did want to provide a quick update on a couple of these things. The first was defining and getting agreement on new department, program, and location codes consistent across all campuses. That has been completed, and we are using those data structures for our next round of data conversions. Then on the HR recruiting side, one of the key things that was getting in our way was getting agreement on standardizing the position request approval processes so that it would be similar for all of our campuses. Instead of having some campuses just have 2 or 3 steps and other campuses having 8, 9, or 10 steps. That took some pushing to get done, but I am very grateful for Vice Chancellor Dorsey's support in moving that forward, and that has really helped us to pick up some momentum in moving forward with the new HR timeline. Then on the student recruitment side, we are still looking at and had a great session just as late as yesterday, looking at how we can use the Oracle Cloud environment to support student recruitment for work study across the board. So I'm pleased with the conversations that are occurring in that space, and I'm confident that we'll be able to provide student recruiting capabilities in the Oracle Cloud environment for all of our campuses in July of next year. So more to come on that. And the benefits side, we are still making progress on how we will outsource voluntary contributions for retirement with TIAA. So again, our implementation partner is looking at how to make that work. Payroll costing configurations and labor distribution is still a work in progress. And then on the time and labor front, we did get agreement and concession from the campuses. There was concern about using the web clock functionality for individuals to be able to log their clock in and clock out for their daily activities. The key thing was some workers just don't have access to computers, which is understood, but there is going to be a way for us to upload a spreadsheet that will actually have those times logged. So a manager for a unit for workers that don't have direct access to computers will be able to do this process weekly and get those times logged for those individuals. So we're in a much better place than we were last time I reported on this, and I am seeing some positive progress on all of these fronts, which is giving us confidence that this updated timeline is feasible as I'm speaking to you today. I did mention that I was going to share a little bit of the rationale as to why we would have the HR and the financial system go live at the same time. Key things there, one of the key things that we had to iron out was making sure that we still had a recruitment system available to us. That platform goes end of life in December of this year, but we were able to negotiate an agreement with Image Trend to allow us to extend our use of the platform through July of next year. So we're grateful for their support. But this will also minimize a lot of the data synchronization between PeopleSoft Financials and HR environment, or the HCM Oracle Cloud environment, which results in a lot of double data entry and some manual synchronization that we'd have to plan. So keeping those two environments in sync, having them both go live at the same time, will help us to be able to put that all together in a more cohesive fashion. We are also in the process of finalizing the updated full project plan with all the milestones remapped, and I'll be able to share that update with you next time we talk. I did mention that there is going to be a cost impact for moving the HR timeline to extend it to July of next year. Preliminary estimate is a little less than what I shared last time. It's about $720,000, but that's actually just spreading cost out over a longer period of time as opposed to just incurring additional costs. So I'm not flagging this as a need to have $720,000 additional over what we had already projected for this project, but I'm working with Ryan to finalize what the actual final budget impact will be, and we will bring it to this committee for final approval. But as we are mapping these things out and readjusting where we are with, particularly with the Campus Solutions reimplementation, that'll put all the pieces together, and I'll be able to give that larger bucket estimate of what the final budget impact is going to be. So speaking of Campus Solutions reimplementation, we are still wrapping up our initial discovery and are in the process of developing the documentation which will support our review of all of the things that we wish to accomplish with this particular project. So we have been doing a number, 60 plus sessions, business process assessments with functional offices, doing a deep dive, how they're using the environment today, what the pain points are, and what are our opportunities to take better advantage of the functionality that is currently available in the Campus Solutions environment. We are going to be receiving a BPA document, which is going to be about 1,000 pages as I've been reviewing it and seeing sneak previews of it, which is going to have a very detailed list of all the features and functions in Campus Solutions, where we have customizations, where we can eliminate them, and where we have opportunity to improve and make greater use of the environment for efficiency, for driving efficiency and ease of use for all of our end users. So we will have that in hand sometime in early December. I did want to give this group a sneak peek at what that documentation is going to look like. So this is just the table of context showing each functional area within a module. So this is the financial aid module that you're looking at here. And as I said, the final tally of the full package for this documentation will be close to 1,000 pages. That's why it's going to take us a while to go through this. So this is an example of where we're going to have detailed lists of everything that occurred during the discovery process, as well as an index of all of the customizations that we currently have in each of these modules. what the summary of the functionality as it exists today and what it should look like in future state should be. And most importantly, what the recommendations are for making the enhancements to this environment to improve the usability for all of our end users, our students, most importantly. So these recommendations, and there are going to be literally thousands of them, we will be working with our core technical team to map out which ones are going to be mapped to occur earlier in the process and which ones will need to be deferred. It may depend on some of the things that we will have available through the Oracle Cloud solution. So that process will then allow us to generate that more detailed project plan and timeline. And that's what we'll be able to bring to this group to show and be able to map out in a more detailed fashion. So with that, I'm happy to address any questions that anyone might have on where we are with repaving Main Street or managed print.
Thank you, David. Yeah, we're all back. Questions for David? I'm not seeing any, so thank you very much. This is such a data-driven discussion. It's great to see that you saved 11.66 trees as part of your work.
And we will continue to see great progress on that one. I'm looking forward to reporting that.
So I hope your aspirational goals are at least 15 by the time we meet again. Thank you very much. Moving on to the next agenda item, which is at tab 7 of our materials, capital project status report and 2018 bond project update for the system. Carolyn McDonough.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Case. Yes, good morning, everyone. This report for this meeting for the capital projects list reflects a total of 39 projects, which is an increase of 3 since the last report, given some recent approvals, and reflects about over $400 million worth of projects as they've been authorized. That $400 million is the currently authorized value, but that doesn't include, for example, the University of Maine's GEM project is currently authorized at 15+ million, but we know that's final project value is going to be significantly more than that. So just pointing that out, that those projects on the list are a large number at 400 million, but they're actually even larger than that in reality. But we'll be back for more authorization before we get there. The 2018 bond project report is moving along. We're in our final year of completing those. So we are accounting for nearly all of that $49 million right now, and have leveraged additional funding, bringing the total expected expenditures to around $72 million. So that's a great story to tell for that state bond money. Specific project updates, I just wanted to reiterate what's in the report regarding University of Maine at Farmington's ESCO project. That one is a really key project that's moving right along swiftly this summer and heading toward having a majority of the work done by this fall so that they can take advantage of the winter heating season. And their Early Childhood Education Center project, which is also a very important project for that campus, is moving toward completion. Right now, scheduled occupancy to start in early October, but very exciting work going on there. I just, at the University of Maine, the Harold L. Fromm Foundation grant funded projects, one highlight there is the field hockey field project and center. It's not just a field, but that was ribbon cut last Friday, and they started playing on it. It's a really beautiful facility they have there now.
I will just say it was a great event. I went to it. It was super fun. It was cool. The team was so excited. The speeches were so moving. It was on time and very efficient. It was a great event all around, and a beautiful field. It's going to be transformative.
Great. Thank you for that. And similarly, as far as ribbon cuttings, we had a ribbon cutting last week as well on Tuesday at the University of Southern Maine for their Portland Commons Residence Hall. And I'm happy to report that we have received full certificate of occupancy from the city of Portland, and students had been moving in on select floors that we had partial occupancy for, but we now have full occupancy for that building, and they'll be moving in droves over the next few days. That's all I had for highlights.
Thanks, Carolyn. We have the materials. Are there questions from the committee about the materials or Carolyn's presentation? I'm not seeing any. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on then to the next agenda item. It's our FY 2024 Finance, Facilities, and Technology Committee work plan, which may look familiar to most of us because it's very much like the old one. A couple of tweaks. Ryan, can you lead us through that?
I can. We, for a number of years, had a pretty static work plan here in FFT, and with the help of Chair Donnelly just a few years ago, and then Chair Riley last year, we really did a comprehensive look at the FFT work plan, lined it up with our agendas over the last few years to make sure that we were that we were being fully comprehensive. So as the chair said, it will look very similar to last year. We did make a couple of tweaks for some reports just to adjust the timing. But the standing agenda items, you're very familiar with. We've spent a couple hours kind of reviewing those today. We do have a pretty busy kind of ad hoc agenda depending on what month we're in. Spent a lot of time with the chairs over the last couple of years kind of juggling budget review, budget approval, the multi-year financial analysis, 1 year and 5 year capital plans. Really important that we sequence those in the right order so that we can have the fullest discussion. And so I think we've done a really nice job of teeing those up and lining things up so that the conversations make sense and they help inform board decisions. What you see as well in the ad hoc agenda is several references to our budget timeline, starting with those initial public meetings and readings that we do in March. The second reading that we added just a couple of years ago in April, approval in May, and then working right through again to the MYFA. New to the agenda last year, at Trustee Cates's request, we did add kind of a deep dive issue that we try to tackle at each of these meetings. We've been pretty successful. Sometimes we get a super busy agenda and we just can't fit one in. But today we'll end the agenda talking about the MYFA. I'm really excited about the plan we're working on with Gretchen, Carolyn, and Nate, as well as Trustee Cates and Trustee Riley, to do a series of briefings from the campuses on capital plans over the course of the rest of this calendar year and into the next year, where we'll focus on 1 or 2 campuses, give presidents an opportunity to talk about capital plans in a big picture sense, not just the 1 year plan, not just the 5 year plan, but what's the vision for the campus, allow the trustees to participate in that conversation. So you'll see that right at the top of the work plan as well. Again, after that, it's generally a reflection of reports that come to you at different times of the year, often with agenda items, sometimes they're just standalone reports. So I think with that, Mr. Chair, that's a pretty good review of the work plan, and happy to join you in answering any questions.
Thanks. And by the way, this is not carved in stone here, and particularly, as Ryan said, with regard to subjects for deep dives at upcoming meetings, please feel free to share those with me as we go forward, so we can be talking and exploring things which are of interest to the committee. And again, even after today, if you think, why aren't we talking about this, or why aren't we talking about that? Let's discuss it. And this is not locked in necessarily, but this is how we intend to proceed otherwise. Any questions at all about this, or suggestions or concerns? I am not seeing any. So thanks, Ryan. Why don't we move on then? We've got.
Mr. Chair, you do have one question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see Barbara. Trustee Alexander, please go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering, and a question to you, Roger and Ryan, how would it be helpful, I'm asking, to identify those particular topics from the strategic plan that will be particularly of concern and interest and work by the Finance Committee, and to have your work plan identify those at a high level and discuss how you might integrate those policies in your work plan. This is a topic that I think is perhaps useful for all of the board committees, and wondered if you had thought about how you might want to do that here.
Thank you. Let me go to Trustee Kane, who may have a parallel thought.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. And Trustee Alexander, you probably remember at our last meeting of the Strategic Planning Committee, we talked about how that is absolutely going to happen. The next step of the process is that the additional timelines are being laid out for all the various goals by the presidents that will come to our committee in its next iteration later this week. And when we have the timelines, we absolutely are going to be bringing it to all of the committees to make sure which items would be right for other committees to take on more directly, which items might we do in tandem, right, as we go forward to have joint conversations or joint presentations. But absolutely, I think that's a really important part of integrating the strategic plan and making sure it doesn't sit off to the side. I couldn't agree more.
Thank you. Trustee McMahon.
One thought that occurs to me that we don't do a very good job at is a sort of post-mortem on capital projects which we say are going to save us money. We never sort of see the results. I'm sure we do save money, but we never see the results of a committee of a project that says this is going to save us so much money a year if we do it. Is it possible to have some regularly scheduled post-mortem, is probably the wrong word, review of capital projects demonstrating that we actually achieved what we said we were going to achieve when we planned it?
Mr. Chair, happy to take that one back to our team. Had some really great conversations with Gretchen, Nate, and Carolyn this week about the capital plan and how we set that up. I think we can incorporate this right into those conversations and see if we can check that box.
Thanks for the suggestion. And Trustee Alexander and Trustee Kane, I think that strategic planning committee might even be tomorrow. So why don't we, if I'm not mistaken.
It is. It's tomorrow at 8 a.m. bright and early.
So why don't we let's have that discussion as part of that, and thank you for suggesting that it be front and center in our mind on this committee, and we'll wait to see what the strategic planning committee suggests in that regard, and we'll make sure it gets incorporated into our meeting. So thank you both for that. Any other comments about the work plan? Okay, seeing none, we can move on then. We've got about an hour left, and we're going to split that time first talking about the 5-year capital plan, and then taking a little bit deeper dive, as Ryan said, into the multi-year financial analysis. So for the next half hour, we're going to talk about the 5-year capital plan, which everybody has received in their materials. And Nate Harris, the Associate Director of Capital Planning, is going to lead us through that discussion. And hopefully this will generate comments and questions. Nate, welcome.
Well, good morning, and thank you, Chair Cates, and good morning, everybody here on the call. I'm excited to bring to you the 5-year capital plan that covers FY24 through FY28. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here with you all, so we can all follow along on the presentation. So when we talk about the 5-year capital plan, one of the things that's different from the 1-year capital plan that I presented to you all recently is that the 5-year plan is a little bit more aspirational. And by that, I mean we allow the universities to identify projects that they want to accomplish over those 5 years, but they don't necessarily have all the funding secured for those projects. So you will typically see those identified as TBD or to be determined funds, but they could be other funds that aren't secured, like earmarks that are still going through the process or fundraising that's still taking place. Just like the one-year plan, we also asked the universities to provide a narrative along with their project list. And so you will see that in your sections as you go through the report. One of the things we did a little bit different this time, though, is we asked them to highlight the ties to unified accreditation and the strategic plan, and how those ties affect their capital plan and their thinking. And so here is a list of some of those kind of common areas that they identified across the strategic plan and tying to unified accreditation as they thought about their capital plan in general and some of their projects specifically. So overall, our capital plan for the next 5 years is just under $1.2 billion. It supports over 400 projects valued at just over $1.5 billion. So here's a look at our capital plan as we look at the funding and how it divides across the different project types or project categories. And I won't go through all of these. I'm happy to answer any questions, but one of the ones that always kind of comes up, so I will talk about, is the difference between renovation and renewal. So renovation is much more extensive work. Typically, you can think about either changing the inside of the structure, moving walls, taking walls down, and getting in behind the walls to do work. Renewal, on the other side, is more of an update on the way the inside looks. So that would be painting, new carpets, maybe upgrading the lighting and things of that nature. So that's kind of a difference, a quick difference between the two. Of course, renovation covers a lot of different things, and often going through renovation, not only are they tackling maybe some of the systems behind the walls, but they're also working to bring that space up to code, whether that's ADA or fire code compliance. So as we look at our 5-year plan, the overall amount is a modest 4% increase over last year's 5-year plan. But there are a few changes in some of these categories that I will point out. So as you look at our new space or new construction that's going to take place, it's 44% of the planned expenses across the 5-year plan. And that is a 6% increase over last year's 5-year plan. As you look through kind of the details, most of that growth in new construction takes place in FY25 and FY26. One of the other big changes is the change in renovation. So we have 28% of the funds going to renovation. That's a 10% increase over last year's 5-year plan. And then finally, we did see a change for renewals. So renewals make up 3% of this year's 5-year plan. Last year's 5-year plan, they made up almost 11%. So a decline in those renewal areas. As we look at our plan, it's useful to look at where our funding is coming from. And so as you can see, over 20 different funding sources are being pulled together to execute this 5-year plan. And I'm not going to go through all of them, but I did pull kind of the largest percentage of those overall areas that make up. So the ones listed here make up 92% of the overall funds for the 5-year plan. The biggest contributor is those TBD funds, making up just under a third, making up 30% of those funds. Fundraising is another big piece, 16%. That is almost double what we showed last year in the 5-year plan. A lot of that is related to the UMS Transforms project and the matching funds that are being pulled together to match the Harold Alfond Grant Foundation's monies. The rest of the ones you see here are relatively similar to what we've seen in the past as far as the percentage of the overall capital plan. So next we take the capital plan, and just as I did with the 1-year plan, we look at the cost brackets, kind of where these projects fit when you look at the overall estimated cost of that project. And this is a useful way to look at the breakout. One, these are kind of natural breakpoints as far as complexity and work that's being done. And it helps give us a sense for where the weight of effort is going. So I think this is very informative as you look at those very large projects over $10 million. Those are 22 projects, about 5% of the overall number of projects, but 69% of the overall dollars are going towards those projects. Obviously, these are large, very complex projects. They usually have multiple funding sources that come towards or pulled together to execute them. And there's much higher risk of increased cost due to delays and other issues like that. On the flip side, as we look at the bottom of the list, those smaller projects under $500,000, those are 62% of the total project numbers, but only 4% of the dollars. And these are challenging for a whole nother reason. So these are a lot of small projects, and these place a large workload on staff. So it's a lot harder to manage a lot of little projects versus one big project. And at the same time, when you look at a lot of these smaller projects, in many cases, facility departments are executing these in-house. So there's a lot more work being done by staff to execute these small projects across the system. This is a look at the portfolio view that we've been working at along with Gordian to build. I showed this during the 1-year capital plan, but just as a reminder, you see a row at the very bottom that shows kind of the percent of the gross square footage and what areas it kind of goes under. And so you can see immediately the largest percentages fall under both our academic facilities and our residence halls. You can then look into each of these categories and see where they fit within their net asset values, starting from green, which are very good, down to dark red, which are not so good. And again, your eyes are kind of immediately drawn to those same two areas of residence halls and academic facilities. And this is designed to be a tool that universities can then use to look at their overall portfolio across the facilities and where they plan to spend their monies. And this ties directly to the strategic plan's effective infrastructure portfolio goal 1.1 of addressing our physical infrastructure and comparing the needs in relation to other areas across the portfolio. We are also working with Gordian to take this a step further and take a look at, within these categories, the oldest buildings, which usually need the most work. And so we're going to start looking at those buildings that are over 45 years old, and then have a NAV lower than 50. And these will provide detailed, kind of discrete examples for universities to look at to determine which areas they want to prioritize or need to prioritize moving forward, which then helps get towards NETCHI in their report. They did note that the system needed to look at our overall facility age and compared to what we see across the higher ed. So what I'm going to do over the next couple slides is take our 5-year plan and compare it across this portfolio view to see where we plan to spend our money. So this first bar graph simply pulls in the entirety of the 5-year plan. So this includes not only new construction, but renovations, and it includes non-facility expenditures. So what do I mean by that? And what are some examples? So under the athletic bar, not only do we have athletic buildings, but in this view, we also see athletic fields. Under the blank category, those are typically your grounds infrastructure or utility infrastructure work that's happening outside the facility. Or there are some cases where there are work plans that affect multiple buildings. So you heard earlier about Farmington's ESCO project, where they're doing that HVAC work on multiple facilities. And so that project falls under the blank since it's affecting buildings across the portfolio. So those are a couple examples. So next, we kind of remove those non-facility expenditures. Now we're looking at only the work that's happening on the facilities, and now kind of fits within that Gordian portfolio look. And as you can see, the majority of our funds are going to those two areas that were highlighted with the most need, both academic buildings and residence halls. We then take a look at the same data, but pull out new construction to see where are we spending our money as far as renovations, renewals, safety and code upgrades, and things of that nature. And again, you see the kind of priority list stays the same in the same order. We have academic and then residence halls kind of leading the way, and everybody saw reductions in their overall expenditures. But there were greater drops if you compare across for both athletics and research. And so then we just look at where are we planning to spend our money as new construction as we move forward. So again, academic space, athletic space, research, and residence halls are receiving almost all that money. So some examples for those academic facilities. We have the Center for the Arts that are included in here, the University of Southern Maine. We have the One Health building at the University of Maine. Those are a couple examples that fit the most of that academic buildings that we're going to do new construction on. In research category, there's GEM and SAWIC at University of Maine. And in the residence hall category, there's a couple of different ones. We have some residual costs, just over $1 million for Portland Commons at the University of Southern Maine. We have a future proposed residence hall at the University of Maine at Augusta. And then we have new residence halls that are in initial planning for the University of Maine, which is part of a larger kind of initiative where they're examining all the residence halls needs and looking at both renovation and potential new construction to update and upgrade those facilities on that campus. So where does all of this fit within? Well, let me say, before I get to that, I will note, and we talked about the TBD funding in the past, but again, majority of this new construction is TBD funding. So about $203 million. So a lot of it is TBD, and then the rest, there's fundraising, and then there are some actual monies associated. So in this area, especially for new construction, there is a lot of work that needs to be done to kind of secure that funding as we look forward across the 5 years that this plan covers. So where does this fit within kind of Gordian's targets? So again, just to reorient everybody to this, this slide, Gordian takes our overall plan, and then they take out those projects that aren't renewal, renovation, and work on specific projects. They remove utility and grounds infrastructure. They remove new construction or demolition, and look at where we're spending into our existing facilities. A couple changes from last time. You may note that kind of the slope of that blue and purple line has come down a little bit. When we briefed the one-year plan, it looked like for 2023, January 2023, we were looking at a 15.1% rate of inflation. Now, as they redid the numbers, that number's come down to 8%. So that's kind of reduced the slope of the line a little bit and improved where we kind of hit those targets. Some of the factors as they look at the as they build this slide. So looking forward, this is projecting an estimated 6% escalation factor going forward. So again, that could change based on what happens with our economic factors. And this doesn't include things like when we look at new construction. When new buildings come online, there'll be bigger needs in the future to maintain and keep those buildings online. So those in the future, those targets will increase, but that hasn't been accounted for. At the same time, when we remove facilities through demolition, those needs are taken away and the line comes down. So those kind of two areas are not included as we look at how we hit this target. But overall, as you look historically, this is a fairly significant, we're making a significant investment into our existing facilities that we have not seen as you look back historically. So a lot of work is being done across universities on how to improve and enhance not just the NAV, but the campus as a whole, the look and feel of those buildings. But I do want to caution as we talk about that, again, because of those TBD funds and other unsecured funds, that makes up about 1/3 of the funding that's going into this category. So we could see some changes depending on the success of securing the funding for the projects that help us get to this point. Kind of concludes walking through the brief, but I'd certainly open up for any questions or comments on the presentation or the materials that you received.
Hey, thank you for that very succinct summary. We appreciate it. Questions from the committee, and Nate, perhaps if you could take that slide down, if you would. We'll see everybody. Okay, questions about this? I had one to start off with, Nate, and that is, maybe it's in the materials, I just didn't see it, but can you track for us, say for the last 10 years, and then were this plan to go into effect going forward, the total square footage of buildings that we have throughout the system? Are we increasing our square footage? Are we holding steady? Are we decreasing the square footage? And obviously in an era where we are talking a lot about what's going to happen with our enrollment, to have discussions about whether we're increasing our facilities or holding firm and just trying to make them better maintained, or whether we are actually shrinking our footprint would be helpful information to have.
Sure, and I don't have the specific numbers. We can get those to you. But if you remember back to Gordian's presentation in March, they do track kind of our overall square footage. And so we have been relatively flat in our total gross square footage over the last 10 years. So we do have kind of that measure of where we've been. As far as the impact of this 5-year plan, I don't yet have that detail. I think for some of the, especially for the new construction, a lot of it is still in development. So I don't think we have a good total new square footage number to plug in. We can certainly look at the proposed demolition. And I think we have just over 300,000 square feet of proposed demolition in this plan. So we could take that and look at both some of the new facilities that have recently come online, but we will probably need to wait until some of these new facilities are better kind of thought through and we know what that square footage is to come up with that answer.
Thank you. I think it'd be helpful to have at least, even if they're only estimates, and one more if I could before I get to Trustee Alexander. The decisions you made in at least these aspirational goals with respect to demolition, how did you arrive at your decisions about what to suggest in terms of the volume of demolition?
So historically, we have put out a call to the universities to ask, are there any facilities out there that you're looking to demolish? And so this has been a process that's been going on for several years. And so we've had a running demolition plan based on those submissions. Some that have been approved and have been executed, some that have been approved and have not yet been executed, and others that are still just in that kind of, these are ones we eventually want to take down, but we're trying to secure funding. And so that's kind of how that list is initially developed. And then each year as we go through the capital plan, as the universities submit those facilities for, proposed demolition, then there's the cross check. Do we already have that on the list? If not, we start working to get that added to our list of overall number of facilities that we may want to demolish.
Thank you. Now I'll get to the committee. Chair Riley.
Thank you. We've really become increasingly sophisticated in our planning, and I really appreciate this. It seems to me we do need to be sensitive as each university adapts its mission consistent with the strategic plan. We would expect, I think, this capital plan to change as well. So I think we should leave that open. And I share Roger's concern about the deferred maintenance. There's a big chunk of money for new buildings, which I totally appreciate. We need to keep moving and keep being competitive, but I'm deeply concerned about the footprint and deferred maintenance and how much we should be spending on new buildings versus making sure what we have is up to snuff. And I assume, and not for conversation today, but as we look at these projects, I assume that each of them will have adequate maintenance reserves built into the budgets to make sure that we don't again get into the deferred maintenance dilemma. My last, I think, concern, and it was sort of a footnote in the University of Maine's discussion that in building their life sciences building, they need to contemplate a potential medical school. I recognize that that's a study that we're engaged in, so we need to wait until we get the data. But I would just express grave concerns, as important as a medical school may be to UMaine's mission. Those are extraordinarily expensive undertakings. And I don't think we're doing all we need to do to become more efficient and have the resources to be able to support that. But I will await the study.
Thank you. Trustee Flood.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure, Nate and Ryan, did I hear it correctly that most of the funds in the 5-year plan are to be determined? I think you mentioned that several times, Nate. That's pretty clear. But then I thought I heard you, excuse me, also say that this plan would require us to double our fundraising in our 5-year plan. And my recollection is that we're coming off of a historic group of fundraisers, and they've done a great job, and the fundraising has been spectacular. You're saying we need to double that? Is that correct? I just want to be sure I heard that correctly.
That's not exactly correct. And so the doubling is the actual dollar value associated with projects is double than what was in the last 5-year plan. Now, that doesn't take into account or differentiate currently raised monies versus still need to raise monies. It's just total fundraising dollars. And so last year's 5-year plan, in many ways, had that initial tranche that they assumed what they needed for fundraising. So this year's 5-year plan includes probably a lot of that fundraising that's taken place over the last year. That's already in there. So it's not necessarily doubling of what's already been done. It's just what was initially projected for fundraising that's changed.
Thanks, but still a lot to be determined and a lot of fundraising, sounds like.
Yes.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Trustee Alexander.
Thanks. A question. You appear to represent that this is a plan that is composed of what the presidents and the campuses have submitted to you as their desired intent. Is there some system-wide office analysis of these proposals? Is this a system-wide plan that reflects system-wide input? I guess is my question. I just didn't understand that presentation from that perspective.
Yeah, and so this is a plan that is developed, and while you see it kind of this one time, this is a plan that takes place and is worked on throughout the year. And so there's multiple factors that go into that. Of course, one of the big ones is the budget. And so that is ongoing discussion, between the system and the universities, not only of how much money they need to spend out of their budget into capital projects, but what those capital projects ought to be. And then certainly for these larger projects that you see on here, there is constant communication both on how to fund those projects, are those the priorities, and how to get that done. One of the things we are looking at improving that process is how do we make it more iterative than it is now, and provide, within the timeline that we have, a little bit more back and forth between the university and the system office for some of that review and that back and forth for better defining that role. But that does happen now, but we do see areas where that can improve moving forward.
I'd like to add, thank you, Nate, that's great. And I just, for your information, because you don't see that part of it, but when we submit the request to the campuses to work, start putting together or updating their 5-year plan, we do provide them guidance on areas that we want them to focus, such as buildings that have low net asset values or need in their program. And then, as you've seen with this report, as Nate said, we are looking to make it more iterative. But at this point, we were able to take that information and compare it to the strategic initiatives and the net asset value needs and those things, and to sort of do that at least initial gut check of how that is tying together.
Thank you. Other questions?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Trustee Flood.
Oh, that was me.
Oh, excuse me, Ryan. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to go back to the conversation about space and square footage, would certainly welcome a deep dive into that space if the committee wants to go in there, but would definitely encourage, when you get into square footage in a system like ours, it's really important that you look at it campus by campus, because we've had, Fort Kent, Augusta, some really strong efforts to take down space. At one point, we had a series of projects at Fort Kent, and we were noting that, we had eliminated about 20% of the square footage on the campus over the course of several different initiatives. But those are small campuses, so they do great work for 6 years. UMaine appropriately puts up an engineering building, and it wipes out, what 6 campuses did as far as reducing space. So that's not to suggest that there aren't cases and times when we need to expand. Absolutely, that's the case. just noting that if you look at that data at a system level, it skews the picture for sure.
That's really helpful, and perhaps if we could get that campus by campus, that would be great. Another question I had, Nate, was a fair amount of this new construction comes from funding from outside, whether it's athletic facilities from the Harold Alfond grant, or I suspect some of the research facilities through various grants from the federal government. Is there any way of, and for instance, we might have decided as a system that we weren't going to put quite as much money into athletic facilities if it was just coming out of state appropriations and tuition, for instance. But due to the incredible generosity of the Alfond Foundation, we have this great opportunity to upgrade those things. But is there any way to kind of pull that out so that we can see where we're spending our discretionary dollars, if you will, on facilities a little better than those gross numbers? Is that a task that can be done?
Absolutely. We can go through and kind of pull out some of those external fund areas and to better highlight how we're spending kind of the monies that we have more direct control over.
Great, thank you. And again, to the extent people are listening, I mean, the message here is not we're going to spend $1.2 billion on facilities in the next 5 years. This is aspirational, and what actually happens depends on lots of different factors, as you've laid out this morning. Other comments or questions for Nate about the plan? And again, I think as Ryan said at the beginning, we plan on taking a look at this campus by campus going forward, starting with our next meeting. We haven't figured out the order yet, but we'll get there. And yes, Trustee Flood.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the fundraising again, and it just seems to me that one of the greatest strengths that we have is our fundraising. The people that are leading our university and the foundations and so forth. And that just, to me, it just shows how very important those people are, those personalities, those skill sets are pretty unique. And I think we're really lucky to have that. So I just wanted to say that.
Thanks. And I just also along similar lines, we're doing a much better job apparently at taking a look at the age and the conditions of our facilities. And I know that's been a priority of the chancellor since he's been here, and he's stayed on it and is pretty religious about making sure we stay on that. So thank you to the chancellor. Anything further on this agenda item? Yes, Chancellor. Yeah, you're on mute.
I thought the presentation was quite good. I tend to look at these things as actively considered, quite frankly. So I think your point about this, we're not signing off on spending $1.2 billion today or any time in the near future. The other thing I would add is we are showing additional strength in other alternative funding. For instance, GEM would come, if it moves forward, would come with a sizable contribution from the federal government. And so if we're going to break things out, we might want to think about that as well, Nate. We have commitments that have been made on some of these projects, and so as to not or are in the process of being made. So I just would throw that. But when asking about this list, I just will honestly say actively considered is what is the way I treat it, and ultimately individual judgments have to be made about each one of these when the time is appropriate, and based on the circumstances we're then facing.
Thank you. Chair Riley, did you have your hand up or no? Okay.
My mistake.
Okay. Anything further on this? No. So again, Nate, thank you very much for the great presentation. We'll look forward to receiving that additional information from you at some point in the hopefully near future. Thank you. And the last agenda item, again, this is the deep dive, if you will, for this meeting, is just a further discussion about the multi-year financial analysis which we've received. And Vice Chancellor Ryan Lowe is going to lead us through that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will put up my presentation in just a second. It is the same version that you saw just a couple of months ago. I am going to I have added just a few campus specific slides at the request of one of the trustees that I think will give you a nice visual of the credit hours, and we'll make that available to you right after this meeting. We've got about 30 minutes or so for this agenda item. I think the hope is that it's a committee discussion. You can just replay the YouTube from last month if you want to hear me do the presentation all over again. So I will hit a couple of key points, maybe no more than 10 minutes. And then I'm hoping we can engage in a good back and forth with any questions. Most of the president's available to answer any specific questions. And so with that, let me bring the PowerPoint up from last month. And let me just say a couple things about the MYFA, maybe for our audience and those that are newer. We've been doing the MYFA since about 2008. It is a 5-year window. We really used the current or the upcoming fiscal year. So the board just passed the 2024 budget. That's the first year in the 5-year forecast and really provides us a really solid base to build off. And then we go out and work with the CBOs, we work with the campuses, we understand what we think enrollment will be over the course of the next 5 years. That's obviously heavily influenced by the campuses. We make projections for things like tuition and state appropriation and kind of roll those forward. What the MYFA is not, is it's not a crystal ball. The idea is not that that we take this 2024 budget that we have and we just put everything on autopilot. We wouldn't do that as a university, and the MYFA to a certain extent, that's what it does. It kind of plays out when the MYFA shows a campus developing a big budget gap, for instance, in the 3rd year, we don't have the campus go in and then solve that budget gap. So likely the case will be if you're balancing your budget in 2024 with some one-time resources, unless you're going to see a significant increase in enrollment or in revenue from other source, you're likely going to have a gap that's bigger than that by the time you get out to the 5th year. So they start off small and then they will likely grow. Same thing really the other way around. If you're generating consistent surpluses, you've done that for a few years, the MYFA again will kind of reinforce that behavior as you move forward. One of the great things about this is it is a dashboard, an interactive tool for us, and so this is not just a one and done exercise. So one of the things that we've talked with the chair about is typically in October. We would come back to this committee with any supplemental budget changes for the 2024 budget. So imagine we got a campus out there that projected 25,000 credit hours, and based on everything that we're seeing, it's looking like it's going to be 23. October is the window when we would come back to you and kind of rebalance those campus budgets. What we're going to do this year also is go back in and essentially redo the enrollment in the MYFA. So if we had originally projected 600,000 credit hours and now we think it's going to be 580, we'll go back and we'll reset that first year base, and we'll show you how it rolls out over the course of the next 4 years, so that you can see not just how it exists now, but how it will be impacted by fall enrollment. As I mentioned in July, we really narrow this down to kind of really 7 key revenue and expense drivers. If we understand where enrollment is and we understand what our tuition rate is going to be, and we guess correctly what state appropriation is going to be, there's half the battle. That's 91% of our revenue base there. compensation and benefits, we know, is a big piece of that. So if we can figure out some of these really big categories, then we can really get a good feel for how things could potentially play out over the next several years. These are the projections that we built for this MYFA. We could all sit down and come up with completely different scenarios for sure. I'm not going to suggest that I will get all of these right. In fact, I won't. We've gone back and looked at these before, and never once have we hit it exactly perfect. Sometimes it works out better for us. Sometimes not, maybe not so much. And oftentimes the enrollments are not exact either. But these feel like, based on what we know, based on where we are today, these were the best assumptions we could come up with. It does not mean that employees should go out and assume that there will be a 3% compensation increase next year. That will go through the traditional bargaining process. And same thing with tuition rates. I've done this enough times to not assume that the board is going to automatically increase tuition by 3% in 25, 26, and so on. But we think it's the starting point that makes the most sense. The MYFA is certainly impacted by things like state appropriation, but what we know is the biggest factor for any of our campus budgets is going to be enrollment. So you see the 2024 column there on the left reflects what this committee and the board passed back in May, 604,525 credit hours. That does include early college. We include early college here because it's a revenue source, and that's what the purpose of the MYFA is. So there's no reason for us to exclude early college for this purpose. The projections that come from the campuses, you can see how those play out over the course of the next several years. There are some, I won't call them anomalies in there, but you can see the outliers in there. Some campuses are generally flat. We have some campuses that have seen some positive things on the ground. They made some positive changes, and they're reflecting those changes as we move forward. And then we have things like Your Pace and the Presque Isle credit hours, which are which are a slightly different animal here. You can see growing from 47,000 credit hours all the way up to 83,000 credit hours. If that played out like that, we would have Presque Isle eclipsing the credit hours that UMA produces, for instance. So though again, we're not predicting the future. This is just how we think potentially things could play out. You see here the percent year over year changes from each of the campuses, as well as the 4-year rates. We had a couple of trustees that requested a visual. So it's great to see what the credit hours are going to be for the next 5 years, but show us what they were the previous 5 years as well to really kind of complete that picture. And so this is what the system version of that chart looks like. You see the really sharp reduction in credit hours that we had from 22 going down into 23. For 24, there's that 604 number. So again, another decrease, and then kind of leveling off for a couple of years. When we get out into 27 and 28, we're picking up a lot of those credit hours at Presque Isle, for instance, that are coming up. The Orono credit hours were expected to rebound as well. So that is what that upward bend is showing. I'll show you some specific campus ones. I'll just flip through these really quickly. Again, we have presidents who are here and can comment if there are questions on any of the individual campuses. But again, you can see faces here a little bit off the screen. You can see in this case the projected credit hours for UMA. They are within the high and the low mark of the last 5 years. So certainly would not suggest that they are unattainable. They're below the 76,000 from just a couple of years ago and higher than they were in 23. Again, just go through these fairly quickly. Here is University of Maine at Farmington. You can see the fairly significant drop off in credit hours from 19 to 23. Still projecting a continuing erosion of those credit hours, down at least another 2,000 credit hours over the next 4 fiscal years. But you see a rate of decline that is certainly slowed, reflected here. Again, when we get to October, if that 40,390 number is lower, then we'll make an adjustment, and that will impact the out years as well. University of Maine at Fort Kent. This is the kind of the V shape I think maybe the only one in here. So a really significant drop in credit hours from 19 to 23, building back up in 24, and then starting to increase steadily out through 2028. Again, I'll defer to the campus on any specifics, but we are starting to see some really positive numbers reflecting a lot of the work that you heard from Fort Kent. I think back in March, if you go back to their budget presentation, talked about really overhauling a lot of that recruitment process and seeing some really positive results from that, and those are reflected here as you roll forward. This is the University of Maine at Machias. Fairly consistent credit hour projections over the course of the MYFA. Here's the steep growth at Presque Isle. Actually, we had to go back and readjust the scale. Significant kudos to them for diversifying their credit hour base, but I'll defer any more details there to President Rice. Then wrapping up the last couple ones in here, University of Southern Maine, again, showing a really rapid decline in credit hours here. I would emphasize, again, I think the president talked about this when we were talking about the MYFA in July, really conservative, feel really comfortable saying this is a really, really conservative forecast here. I don't think anyone thinks this is how it would play out. But it might play out this way if we did nothing. We know that's not the case. We know that President Edmondson and her team have undertaken a number of initiatives, and I think we're hopeful that will certainly bear some credit hour fruit. And then consistent, no, I shouldn't say, fairly consistent credit hour projections from 25 through 28 at Maine Law. I'm really reflecting a kind of a steadying, if you will, of credit hours. If you go back pre-19, then you'd see some drops there as well. And I think I just must have hit a button fast because I don't remember going over the University of Maine. So let me just go back. There we go. Sorry, I went through that really quickly. And then University of Maine credit hours here. So a pretty significant drop last year, down to 16,000 credit hours. The 24 budget was another 9,000 credit hours. Do see that going down again a couple of more years. We talked about a large graduating class impacting those numbers a couple of years ago. As that works its way through, you can see the university kind of bouncing back. So going back to my comment in the last discussion about, about the capital plan, it's a little bit the same here. When you're looking at system-wide credit hours, you always need to recognize that, the University of Maine and the University of Southern Maine are, between 75 and 80% of our total credit hours. So if you're seeing a drop like this, and we saw a similar one, you'll recall from the USM slide, there's nothing the other campuses are going to do that is going to change the direction of that bend, short of what's going on at Presque Isle. So I think that gets us through the individual ones. Again, just a reminder here at the very end of what the numbers that all of these roll up to. System-wide, you can see the campus by campus numbers going from left to right for each of the campuses. But this is what the system numbers add up to. 10.8 reflected what we had to resolve in the 2024 budget. Again, absent any significant changes, we see more of that over the course of the next 4 years if it played out like this. What is different, again, if it won't, but if it played out like this, what's different between how 24 played out and how 28 plays out in the MYFA is that in 2028, we're showing a total deficit of about 13.2 million. The deficit at USM alone in 28 was 16 million. So in theory, the other campuses were largely balanced. And we had that conservative credit hour forecast that really pulls down the USM numbers. So I think that's enough of me talking about that. Happy to answer any questions. I see several of presidents are here and a couple fill-ins for those presidents. So happy to take any questions, Mr. Chair.
Thanks very much, Ryan, for the presentation. Questions from the committee? I'll start off, Ryan. Is it possible that we've got total credit hours system-wide and by campus? Is it possible to break those down both system-wide and by campus of how many we expect to be in-person credit hours and how many we expect to be online credit hours? Do we have those expectations yet?
I would assume we would because they're often at different tuition rates. And so, we put in the tuition rates and then the campuses plug in the numbers and then it does the math for us. So I'm going to say yes until my staff corrects me, and we can pull that information out.
Yeah. Again, as we're deciding long-term decisions about facilities, that's would be an important thing to know.
It's an absolutely critical point. We had that discussion with the CBOs, with Nate, Carolyn, and the Gordian team just last week about the impact of those remote credit hours on facilities. And do you look at facilities in a different way if that's the case? And I think the answer is obviously yes.
Thanks. And the other question was, I think I'm right in saying that the number of credit hours the average student is taking, once you figure in part-time students, is down. So if we could perhaps see the number of people system-wide and by campus that they're anticipating in each of these years, as opposed to just credit hours, is that something that's relatively easy to develop?
We can do that. Yep.
Okay, thanks. Open it up then for discussion and questions with the committee.
Roger, David.
Yes, David, go ahead.
Ryan, you'd included early college in this. Is early college moving one way or another? Is there a trend line of early college given lower high school numbers that might be affecting the?
Yeah, the biggest challenge we've had to early college is really the funding source. Despite the decline maybe in the K-12 population, we could enroll more early college students, I suspect, if we had resources. So I'll say it's generally started to flatten out again, but only because the resources have also flattened out. And these are state resources, just as a reminder. The state covers the portion of the tuition that we don't waive on our end.
If I could just add to that discussion, there was a period of time 4 years ago where a number of our universities were not active as they might be in building those numbers up, and that has changed, and hence Ryan's answer to that question. I would also tell you that I truly believe that the difficulties of the school systems in filling positions, teaching positions, particularly in advanced areas, has led a larger number to be taking those advanced courses through us as opposed to within their own system. So I think Ryan's point is spot on. But I would also say that I think our individual universities have done a better job in outreach.
I'd like to just take a quick second and jump in as well to agree with what both Ryan and the Chancellor said. It's absolutely correct. And the enrollments were growing, but because of the funding model, we've had to keep them pretty flat the last 2 years. But we did just receive some good news that I believe Amy Hubbard, our early college executive director, is going to be working with the state on that funding model to look at changes to that will potentially help us enroll more students.
Right, maybe not as part of this, but I know you've already developed this. Can you resend us the chart on the historical and the projected number of high school graduates each year in Maine? Say for the last, going back 10 years and going forward for 5 or so, just so we can kind of match that up with this.
Yeah, absolutely. Trustee Flood has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Pat.
Thanks. This is great. I've seen this several times, and every time I see it, I'm very glad that Ryan's heading up our finance group. It's really great, and thank you. And I guess I appreciate the realism, and I think the fact that we sometimes haven't been realistic in the past, and I think there's been a lot of coaching towards being very realistic and maybe perhaps conservative in some of the data that we share going forward. But I might be wrong on that. But I guess I'm just surprised when I see so much going on at the University of Southern Maine, and I see their numbers like not reflecting that going forward as far as enrollment. And so I'm not troubled by it, but I'm just surprised. And there's reasons for those numbers going down that I, as a layperson, don't understand, but I guess I'd like to understand it a little bit better. And, is it because of what we offer at USM? Is it because of competition? Or is it because we're just being really conservative because we don't want to have this thing grow because we're putting in much too aggressive numbers? I just would like to understand from Jackie or someone representing USM, are our numbers just conservative, or are they real? And what is our more apple pie optimism view? And do we have that view? I think we do. I just wonder what it is that is more optimistic that we could discuss. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll try to jump in. I'm driving, so forgive me if it's a bit noisy. And I hope you can hear me okay. But,
yeah.
Really appreciate the question. And I did choose to go with more conservative projections just to be on the safe side. And also because I have a campus community that I think really needs to wake up around, at least some of the people need to wake up around the realities of our current budget situation and to double down on efforts to be student focused every day and to make sure that we're doing all we can to recruit and retain our students. With that said, the more optimistic, it is absolutely more optimistic than the projections I gave. For example, our first to second term retention rates this past year, which means fall to spring retention rates of our first time full-time students, were over 89%, which is the highest it's been in 11 years. Our graduation our 5 and 6 year graduation rates are creeping up. They're not where I want them to be, but I really want people to take seriously the responsibility we have to be strong stewards of our budget and our finances. And I have formed a President's Budget Advisory Council and some associated task forces to get as many people at the university involved in this process as possible so that we can reset the budget and make sure we're positioned for the really great growth that's ahead. There is no doubt that this university is going to grow. We're going to be known for excellence nationally, and I'm excited about the future. But I just purposely chose to be a little on the cautious side for planning purposes. I hope that answers your question. And Ryan or the chancellor may have more to add because we've talked about that as well.
Yes, thank you. And be careful driving. And and I understand that some of this seems to me to be messaging on by your leadership, and I appreciate that. And that's a good explanation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Trustee Flood.
Chancellor?
What I would say, I support Jackie in the stance she has taken. I also believe it is a message to the broader community that she works with about the situation that they find themselves in. And I think it's realistic. That's a realistic number if they're not successful in all the initiatives that Jackie and others have brought forth. I would also remind everybody that any of our universities that are close to a community college tend to be losing, more students that way. And a decision's been made to provide an associate's degree for free. What we can hope for, again, for universities that are close to our universities that are close to community colleges, is that eventually there'll be somewhat of a boomerang, that is the return of students who want to get the baccalaureate degree. That number has gone down during the COVID experience, and we are losing more people up front to community colleges, but there are reasons to be hopeful in the long run. But this is tough medicine, and the thing about illness is to realize you're ill, and I think Jackie and the folks that she has in her cabinet are doing a good job around that. The other thing I would also say to you is the introduction of those additional beds in the Portland area may also predict more students transferring ultimately from the community college, either with an associate's degree or even sooner, while also protecting the quality of student experience out at Gorham. So it's a very complicated issue in the first year, and we'll see how the rest of that plays out. Just 2 cents, sorry.
Thanks, Chancellor. Chair Riley?
Thanks. And I appreciate President Edmondson's conservatism. Can only be better, and it will be with her leadership. But I am concerned, especially as we continue to focus on the importance of getting ourselves to a balanced budget without system reserves. These are scary times across higher education, everywhere nationally. So I think knowing what the assumptions were for each of these campuses, I'm not sure this time now, would be extremely important. I had hoped that when we looked at I love the charts, and I had hoped that when we saw the charts, we might be able to formulaically predict that this is the rate of growth that we should anticipate seeing, given what's happened in the past. I'm not sure we can yet. There may be the opportunity to do that. So I just caution us that we need to be very careful about what assumptions go into this, that we understand those assumptions. It will help certainly the board support those initiatives on each campus that will support those more ambitious enrollment proposals. And I'd also just like to call out President Hedin, the presentation that we saw. Well, I don't think we're going to enroll our way out of our financial problems. It is critically important that we do our best. And the enrollment presentation that you gave to us was impressive, and it seems to have borne fruit and results, and congratulations.
Thank you, Chair Riley.
Thank you. Other questions and comments? So Ryan, we'll revisit this, I guess, at our October meeting, right? Because the census will come out before our meeting, and you can do.
Yep.
These numbers.
We'll plug in new enrollment numbers, and we can come back to these kind of same questions and talk a little bit more about it as well.
Excellent. Other questions about this multi-year financial analysis, or how it's been presented, or other information the board would find helpful in making this a useful tool for us? Yes, Trustee Kane.
Thank you. I think the most sort of, when we would have been doing this before I was on the board, we would have had a different picture and not been able to see the pandemic. And I think it's just such an obvious, at the risk of stating the obvious, the pandemic is a huge piece of this. And I think it will also be interesting, all the factors the Chancellor laid out and Ryan laid out, to see what is the next big opportunity, right? Because even before, at the very first meeting I ever attended 3.5 years ago, one of the big agenda items that still stays with me was Robert Placido talking about birth rates, right? We literally had long presentations about birth rates 20 years ago and the impact that that has now, which was something we were already dealing with before the compounding factor of COVID. So I think it's just really interesting, but it'll be interesting to see what other factors come into play that we couldn't have predicted that hopefully will be on our side.
Thank you. Other questions, other comments from committee members or presidents or anyone? Again, we'll be discussing this more in October for sure. Anything else? I think we've then finished that agenda item, and I believe, Ryan, correct me, we've finished our agenda for today as well. We are good to go. So we will end the meeting, hopefully see everybody at USM in a few short weeks, and have a great rest of the day. We are adjourned.
Great. Thank you. Great meeting.
Thank you.